Will Russia go to war with Ukraine? All week, you've heard numerous answers to this question. In Ukraine, 71% of the people believe their country is already at war with Russia. This is a complex crisis, and all the answers are hidden in history. Did you know there was a time when Kiev was more powerful than Moscow? There was also a time when Ukraine and America were adversaries. Tonight, we'll bring you all these stories. We will tell you why Russian President Vladimir Putin is obsessed with Ukraine. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, and this is Gravitas Plus. We begin in the 9th century. There was a state called Kievan Rus. This is where it was located. The Slavic people lived here. The city of Kiev was their capital. Between 980 and 1015, the Kievan Rus was ruled by Grand Prince Volodymyr. In Russian, his name is Vladimir. In Ukrainian, Volodymyr. And as fate would have it, these are also the names of the presidents of these two countries today. Anyway, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians draw their lineage from this Slavic state. A lot changed in the centuries that followed, and for a lot of it, Ukraine was under Russian rule. In the 1900s, the two were Soviet republics. Russia, the most powerful of the 15 republics, and Ukraine, the second most powerful. It had defense industries, large agricultural lands, and housed much of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. During the Cold War, Ukraine was the arch rival of the United States. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Ukraine became independent, as did Russia. Ukraine inherited much of Soviet nuclear arsenal, but gave it up to Russia in 1994. In exchange, Moscow guaranteed Ukraine's security and promised to respect its sovereignty. They signed the Budapest Memorandum along with these countries. Cut to November 2013, Viktor Yanukovych was the president of Ukraine. He had a reputation for heavy-handedness, corruption, and above all, for being openly pro-Moscow. In 2013, he rejected an EU trade deal. This deal could have meant greater integration with the European Union. Instead, Yanukovych decided to take a $15 billion bailout from Russia. To many Ukrainians, it felt like being sold to Moscow, so protests broke out. They were called Euromaidan. Euro because these protests were about Europe, and Maidan because they happened in Kiev's Maidan, what we today know as the Independence Square. Here, protesters chanted, "Sign the EU deal, Yanukovych must step down." Russia supported the president, the West supported the protesters. In February 2014, Yanukovych's government was toppled, the president was driven out of Ukraine, he fled to Russia. Not every Ukrainian was happy with this. Many in the Russian-speaking East wanted Yanukovych to stay. When he was driven out, the minority felt disenfranchised. On the other side of the border, Russia was angry it had lost its puppet. To salvage the situation, Moscow annexed Crimea. Why Crimea? Well, let's now zoom into this part of the world. Crimea is a peninsula. It is located in the Black Sea. In 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea. It was given to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic. Why? Khrushchev hoped the transfer would strengthen, quote-unquote, brotherly ties between the Ukrainian and Russian people. Both Russia and Crimea were part of the Soviet Union. So this transfer did not mean very much. When Ukraine became independent in 1991, Crimea joined it. The peninsula was given special autonomy. It remained home to Russian military bases. Moscow promised to respect Crimean autonomy. Many in Russia were of the opinion that Crimea should not have been allowed to join Ukraine. In 2014, when Yanukovych was ousted from power in Ukraine, Russian military began seizing government buildings in Crimea. Soon the entire peninsula was under military occupation. A referendum followed. On the 16th of March 2014, Crimeans voted to become a part of Russia. Was this vote legitimate? Well, it depends on who you ask. For Putin, this was Crimea's liberation. For the rest of the world, this was Crimea's annexation. The focus then shifted to eastern Ukraine, where Russia-backed separatists had seized territory. Ukrainian forces did not launch an all-out offensive at first, but on the 17th of July 2014, when a flight carrying 298 people was shot down by these rebels, Ukrainian forces decided to flush out the rebels. The separatists began losing ground, so the Russian army stepped in. They invaded eastern Ukraine and fought alongside the rebels. What followed was a series of talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. They resulted in the Minsk Accords. This was first signed in 2014. Both sides agreed on ceasefire and military withdrawal. Ukraine agreed to hold elections in the rebel-held areas. 8 years on, the Minsk Accords remain unimplemented. Ukraine stands as the largest European country excluding Russia. It covers an area of more than 600,000 square kilometers with a population of 44 million and a GDP of more than $155 billion. Per capita income, more than $3,700. Today, Ukraine is divided between East and West in more ways than one. The West sees itself as more European. The East is closer to Russia, be it in terms of geography or sentiment. In the West, most Ukrainians speak Ukrainian. In the East, a third are native Russians. In the West, Russia is looked at with suspicion. In the East, Russia is looked at through the lens of shared history and heritage. Ukraine also remains at war. Its forces are fighting the rebels in the east. Rebel leaders are ruling at least two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. Together, they're known as the Donbas region. Russia has once again sent its troops. This time, they're stationed right at the border. What does Vladimir Putin want? For NATO to stop expanding. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a military alliance. These countries are the founding members of NATO. These countries joined it during the Cold War, and these countries joined after it. Ukraine wants to join NATO too, but Putin wants NATO to exclude Ukraine and every former Soviet state. And this is just half the story. Like I said, a lot is hidden in history. For starters, there is domestic politics. When Putin annexed Crimea, his approval rating skyrocketed. Keeping the nationalistic drum rolling helps the Russian president. Annexing parts of Ukraine also helps Putin restore Russia's superpower image. Again, back to history. Many Russians view Ukraine's independence as a mistake. It is true that Ukraine was ruled by Russia. In fact, Ukraine has barely remained independent pre-1991. There was a brief period before World War I and then another stint in 1600. For the rest of its modern history, Ukraine was under Russia. 1 in 6 Ukrainians is an ethnic Russian. 1 in 3 speaks Russian as a native language. So Putin is right when he says historically they were one. But claiming Ukraine on the basis of colonial history is wrong. It will be like Britain claiming India or South Africa or Spain claiming the Philippines. Past imperialism cannot justify present-day expansionism. Here's what else history tells us. Ukraine was forcefully Russified. Cut to 1700, Russian leader Catherine the Great started Russifying Ukraine. Ethnic Russians were shipped to this part of the world. Schools were told to teach Russian language. By 1800, the Ukrainian language was banned. In 1930, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin steered a famine in Ukraine. Millions of Eastern Ukrainians were killed. The area was then repopulated with ethnic Russians. In the 1940s, the ethnic Tatars were relocated. They too were replaced with Russians. There is a reason why Eastern Ukraine today has so many native Russian speakers. It was designed to be that way. Eastern Ukraine was always dear to Russia. It has coal, it has iron, fertile land. Its historical connection with Russia was forced. Putin time and again talks about the Holy Rus. He says Russians and Ukrainians are one people. 70% Ukrainians reject this thought. 72% consider Russia a hostile state. Today, 33.3% Ukrainians are ready to take up arms against Russia. 21.7% are ready to stage a civil resistance against Russia. 67% Ukrainians want to join the EU. 59% want to join the NATO. Meet the current Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He came to power in 2019 following a landslide victory. He is a vocal critic of Russia. Zelensky openly opposes Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine. 73% of Ukrainian voters voted this man to power. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky represents the pulse of Ukraine, the Ukraine that wants to remain independent of Russia. But Vladimir Putin wants to become the man who revived Russian imperialism. He does not realize the world has moved on. Europe is at war. 77 years after the guns fell silent in the Second World War, the continent is back on the battlefield. All the guesswork, all the diplomacy, all the confusion has ended. Russia has invaded Ukraine. The attack began early this morning. Most of Ukraine was fast asleep. They were woken up by loud explosions. As it turned out, they were cruise missile strikes. What did they target? Ukrainian military installations, their weapon depots, their air defense system, their airports. Putin's strategy was precise and effective. Take out Ukraine's defense and support hubs. For the first few hours, there was confusion, what experts call the shock and awe factor. Ukraine did not know what was happening. Was it a full-scale invasion? Was it just aerial bombardment? Or was it a blitzkrieg? Soon videos emerged on social media, videos like this one. Most of them follow the same pattern. First a flash of light, then a large cloud of smoke. The classic example of what an airstrike looks like. And this happened all over Ukraine. Let me pull up a map for you. This map shows all the cities targeted by Russia. The capital, Kiev, Kharkiv and Kramatorsk in the east, Dnipro in central Ukraine, Mariupol on the Black Sea, Odessa also on the Black Sea, and Ivano-Frankivsk in the west. Is there any strategy to this list? Experts say there is. Crimea in the south is already under Russian control. The east is also effectively in Putin's grasp. Between these two areas is a vast belt of land, Ukraine's southeast, and that's what Russia seems to be targeting. If Odessa and Mariupol fall, Russia can cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Plus, it can create a strategic land corridor. How does Vladimir Putin plan to do it? So far, he's following the military playbook. First, take out air defense systems, then soften ground positions with shelling, and finally send in the troops. All of this may sound tactical and overwhelming. So let me simplify it for you. Russia is ripping up international laws and norms. It has abandoned diplomacy. It has rubbished peace. And it has violated the sovereignty of its neighbor. In this war, there will be bloodshed. So far, Ukraine has reported 50 deaths, 40 soldiers plus 10 civilians. There will be refugees. There will be hardships. And the whole world knows who to blame. The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Around 5 a.m. today, he addressed the Russian public. He announced military operations against Ukraine. His excuse, denazification of Ukraine.
I decided to conduct a special military operation. It aims to protect people who have been bullied and subjected to genocide by the Kyiv regime for 8 years. For that, we will strive for demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine and will bring to justice those who committed multiple bloody crimes against civilians, including Russian citizens.
Now, just to be clear, President Volodymyr Zelensky is Jewish. His family was killed in the Nazi Holocaust. Vladimir Putin is accusing the same Zelensky of running a neo-Nazi regime. As far as excuses go, it's a pathetic one. But in war, truth does not matter. What matters is your military might. And Russia's military supremacy was on full display. Their missiles pounded Ukrainian cities. The Kremlin says only defense installations were targeted. But even precision strikes are not 100% accurate. Let me show you some pictures. The first set is from Kharkiv. You can see shrapnel and damaged garbage cans in a playground. Clearly not a military target. The second set is from the capital, Kiev. Again, this looks like a city square. You can see shops and roads around it. Clearly not a military target. Air raid sirens were booming across Ukrainian cities. The people may have been prepared for it, but when the bombs actually drop, anything can happen. By now, Ukraine had gathered its wits. President Zelensky first worked the phone line. He spoke to all his Western allies, US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, European Union leader Charles Michel, Polish President Andrzej Duda. Then Zelensky addressed his people. Years later, we may look back at this moment when a career comedian became a wartime leader. Zelensky did his best to rally his country.
This morning, dear citizens, this morning has gone down in history. But the story is different, both for our country and for Russia. We have severed diplomatic relations with Russia. Ukraine is defending itself and will not give up its freedom, no matter what Moscow thinks. For Ukrainians, independence and the right to live on their land according to their will is of the highest value.
How is Zelensky mobilizing his army? Any Ukrainian willing to fight has been asked to join the army. In other words, general mobilization. Citizens have been empowered to carry firearms. Healthy citizens have been asked to donate blood. Ukraine is not giving up without a fight. By noon, the first wave of strikes ended. There was a brief lull, and during this time, two things happened. One, there was a massive exodus from Kiev. These pictures should give you an idea. There were long lines of vehicles queuing up to leave Kiev. You can barely see the end of this traffic jam. That's how big it is. And two, Russian ground units started crossing over. We're talking about tanks, soldiers, and military vehicles. They crossed over in two sectors, from the south in Crimea and from the north in Belarus. Take a look. All these vehicles have one thing in common. The tanks, the trucks, all of them, they have a mysterious marking on them. It says Z, the letter Z. What does the Z stand for? Well, it could be a code name. It could be a special mission. The Kremlin won't say what it's about. Alongside the bombardment, a narrative war is also underway. Russia is claiming major strategic gains. They say Ukrainian soldiers are fleeing, that Ukraine's air defense system has been taken out. Tall claims even for Moscow. Ukraine says they have shot down 5 Russian jets and 1 helicopter, and both sides, needless to say, have rubbished each other's claims. The fear is today's attack is just the beginning, that Putin's end game is much bigger than this, perhaps completely invade Ukraine or install a puppet regime. Both scenarios end with a devastated country. How are the Western allies responding to this? Well, their first reaction was along expected lines, criticism and sanctions. The second step was military posturing. NATO has activated quote-unquote defense plans for its eastern allies. Poland is deploying troops to the border, so is Hungary and Slovakia. Another neighbor, Moldova, has declared an emergency. Now, this is all aimed at protecting NATO territory. Frankly, it's of no use to Ukraine. Which brings us to the big question, what happens next? We have identified 3 sectors that could become flashpoints. The first, of course, is Kiev. The capital is without a doubt the biggest prize. The second is southeast Ukraine. Most Russian strikes have focused on this region, southeast Ukraine. Like we said, the idea is to link the rebel territory with Crimea. And 3, the Black Sea. And this could be a game changer, the Black Sea. If Russian warships join the fight, Ukraine could be cut off from the waters. Kiev wants to stop this. It is asking Turkey to shut the Dardanelles and Bosporus Straits. Ankara can do this. They have already condemned Russia's invasion, but they're silent on Ukraine's request. Typical Turkey. The next couple of hours are crucial for Ukraine. The West will huddle to decide on a strategy. Putin's plan will unfold gradually. By Friday morning, there will be more clarity on where this is going. No doubt, the whole world's focus will be on Ukraine. But for the people living there, a long and sleepless night beckons. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Our world is at war. The man waging it is Vladimir Putin. He's the president of Russia. For the longest time, Putin kept the world guessing. Will there be war in Ukraine? Will there not be a war in Ukraine? Then one morning, he decided to shock the world. He invaded Ukraine and dared the world to stop him. If you interfere from outside, you will face consequences, he said. Consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Where does Putin get this nerve from? In 2008, he sent troops to Georgia. In 2014, he annexed Crimea. It's 2022, and Vladimir Putin has single-handedly put Europe in a spot. He has launched a multi-frontal attack on Ukraine. People are calling Putin the new Hitler, the Nazi dictator who wanted to unify Greater Germany. So he sent Nazi troops in the area between the Third Reich and the Sudetenland region in Czechoslovakia. It was home to many German-speaking communities, just like Donbass is home to many Russian-speaking communities. Putin, too, is following Hitler's playbook. He wants to unify his motherland, so he has sent tanks and troops to Ukraine. He has invaded a European country in the year 2022. Again, where does Putin get this nerve from? Putin's grandfather worked as a cook for Joseph Stalin, but that's actually irrelevant here. Experts believe Putin picked his dictatorial traits from a former boss. Putin was once the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. His boss was the city's mayor. His name was Anatoly Sobchak. Putin admired him and is said to have subconsciously picked his traits. Today, Putin's authoritarianism is out in the open. Ukraine says parallels between Putin and Hitler are not a meme anymore. They are Ukraine's reality. You see, if we have to understand the war in Ukraine, we must first understand Vladimir Putin, the man who is pulling the strings of this war. What's in his mind? What has shaped his life? So where do we start? You would know that Vladimir Putin was once a KGB agent. KGB was the Soviet spy agency. When Putin was training for it in 1975, his trainers found out a flaw in the young man. They said Putin had a diminished sense of danger. In other words, what may seem dangerous to you and me may not seem dangerous to Vladimir Putin. He acknowledges this in his biography. He says back in his KGB days, a negative trait often ascribed to him was his lowered sense of danger. The spy agency considered this a very serious flaw. Well, they were not wrong. Look at what's happening now. Putin's dangerous invasion in Ukraine. Which leader today would dare to send tanks into another country? Which leader would be unafraid of repercussions? Putin has been exhibiting this diminished sense of danger since his childhood. He was born in October 1952 in the Soviet city of Leningrad. His parents belonged to the working class. They lived in a Soviet-style apartment and shared the space with two other families. While most children picked up humble sports, Putin decided to pursue a martial art called Sambo. While most schoolboys dreamt of becoming a doctor or a fighter pilot or something glamorous, Putin dreamt of becoming a spy. He first set foot into the KGB headquarters when he was still in his teens. He graduated from the Leningrad State University in 1975 and went straight to join the KGB. He was posted in East Germany, where he mastered smokes and mirrors. Long before Ukraine, Crimea or Georgia, he wrote a campaign biography. It is based on one-on-one interviews. In one of these interviews, Putin recounts an incident from his university days. He says he was driving a car. His martial arts coach was with him. They were on a road outside Leningrad when Putin saw a farm truck passing them. He tried to grab a piece of hay through the car window. Next thing you know, he has nearly lost control of the car. The coach is scared and furious. He turns to Putin and says, "You take risks." Putin replies, "I thought the hay smelled good." Which person looking to lead a country would tell such a story to his voters? Like he's James Bond or something, chasing death casually and bragging about it. Which leader would project himself as impulsive? This book I'm talking about was published in the year 2000, the year Vladimir Putin became the president of Russia for the first time. Things had changed rapidly for him since the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1991, Putin became the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. In 1997, the deputy chief of the presidential staff. A year later, the head of the FSB, the new spy agency, the successor of the KGB. Putin was heading it. In 1999, he became one of Russia's first deputy prime ministers, then prime minister, and then president. His career soared as Russia's reputation tanked. Boris Yeltsin, Russia's first president, was corrupt, drunk, and a laughingstock. Plus, Yeltsin was too close to the West for Putin's taste. You see, while the Cold War was over, its legacy remained, and Putin, a former Soviet spy, could never really get himself to trust the West. He could not ignore the fact that the NATO was growing, that all of these countries had become a part of this alliance. Even back in 1999, Putin feared that NATO would expand, go on to include ex-Soviet republics, and ultimately surround Russia. He was frustrated that Yeltsin was not doing enough to contain the NATO. Putin dreamt of a Russian state, one that would be independent, influential, and feared. Chechnya gave him the opportunity to build that dream state. The region had broken away from Russia, and Chechen rebels had become a nuisance. In 1999, a series of blasts rocked Russia. More than 300 people were killed across several Russian cities. Putin was the prime minister. He began naming, shaming, and blaming Chechens on live television. He started holding regular press briefings. He would whip up nationalistic emotions, call Chechens mad dogs. Putin vowed to avenge the blasts. Soon his approval rating soared from 2% before the bombings to 45% after them. Reports then emerged that Putin may have faked these bombings, that KGB agents could have planted the bombs. Why would they do that? To help Putin's popularity. Russia, of course, quashed this theory and went to war with Chechnya. At least 80,000 people were killed, and Chechnya was brought back to Russia. Instead of gloating, Yeltsin suddenly resigned. He named Vladimir Putin the country's acting president. It was New Year's Eve, 31st of December 1999. Putin was married to a former flight attendant. She had no idea her husband was becoming the president of Russia. Putin had known about this for days, but he never told his wife. He did not tell her he would be the next president. That's how secretive Vladimir Putin can be. Reports say the Russian parliament had no clue about his plans of invading Ukraine either. Yes, he asked for permission to send troops to foreign lands, but the lawmakers never thought he would actually attack Ukraine. In fact, Putin never even needed that permission. He is the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces. He can send troops wherever he likes. So going to the parliament was a stunt. And Putin likes stunts. He once dived deep into the Black Sea, came up with 2 ancient Greek urns. Putin said he fetched the relics from the floor of the Black Sea. It was later revealed the show was staged. We have seen Putin fishing, arm wrestling, posing bare-chested, riding a horse, a Harley-Davidson, showing off his butterfly skills in water, co-piloting a jet, attaching a satellite transmitter to a tiger, hunting. It seems Putin can survive the wild better than Bear Grylls. Putin is talented. He's tough. He's also the controller of facts and the teller of his own story. Just like his story of Ukraine, one where Russia is the victim. The people of Donbass are victims, and a democratically elected government in Kiev is full of Nazis. So Putin has decided to send troops on a denazification mission. Buildings have been flattened, innocent civilians have been killed. Why? Because the Russian president thinks Ukraine and Russia are one, and he does not let anything come between him and his motherland, even if that means keeping secrets from his wife or not attending to his daughter. That's another story. It is said that when Putin was the mayor of St. Petersburg, his daughter met with an accident. She was injured. He was at work. So he sent his deputy to attend to the little girl. That's Vladimir Putin for you. He once refused to read a book by a Soviet defector. He said he did not read books by people who had betrayed the motherland. If you are looking to interpret the current war in Ukraine, try reading it from Putin's point of view. If you want to know what will happen next, try gauging it through Putin's eyes. He's a boy from a working-class family who climbed his way to the Kremlin and became the face of Moscow. He has the backing of powerful KGB officers. He has Russia's Richie Rich on his side. He has been in power for 22 years now. He has dragged Russia into many wars, meddled in the affairs of his neighbors, be it Belarus or Azerbaijan. He has locked up oligarchs who did not align with him, silenced critics who challenged him. Putin has poisoned Russians abroad. He has cracked down on the LGBTQ community at home, tamed the media, and recently arrested those protesting the war in Ukraine. And Ukraine may just be the start. A 2020 vote made Vladimir Putin Russia's president for life. In the last 14 years, he has gone to war thrice. He will remain in power until 2036. That's 14 more years and 13 more Soviet republics to go.